Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mark Schumacher, the CEO of the Home Furnishings Association, and I want to welcome you to our webinar. And today, yet again, another subject that we just know that so many of you are interested in and realize it's critically important to growing and sustaining your business, and that is skill building with your team. And this is going to really be something today that's going to come through loud and clear when we talk about helping you with employee satisfaction and, more importantly, retention. A lot to talk about today. I'm excited about this one. So we'll get to it in just a second, but let me do a little bit of housekeeping here. First of all, I want to remind you that this is going to be recorded. We have our entire library of webinars at myhfa.org/webinar. After we're done here today, this one will join that wonderful library. You can go there anytime and see these in real time. Please share them. It's going to be a lot of great takeaways, and you'll want to revisit this webinar again. Also, if you have any questions as we go along, you're going to notice at the bottom of the screen there is a Q&A tab. Go ahead and put your question in there. We will do our best to get to it before we are done with today's webinar. And also, I want to thank Synchrony. They are the thought leader, and they sponsor our education here at HFA. So without further ado, we've got a great panel. The team does a great job of bringing people together. A familiar face joining us. Sarah Luther is here. She's Director of Talent and Employee Experience at Hometrends. That is an Ashley Home Store franchisee. And she's been with us before and always has some great takeaways. So Sarah, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Also, we have Simon Watson. He's the owner and CEO of Mossword HR Solutions, and he has done an awful lot to apply business processes and all sorts of wonderful creative programs together for people strategies in a number of companies of different sizes. Simon, glad to have you here as well. And we also have Fanai Taye here. She is the Senior Vice President of Human Resources for the Synchrony Group Home Auto. It's one of their divisions. And she's got an incredible background because she spent a lot of time as the Chief HR Officer at Kirkland's. So she certainly knows a lot about the retail landscape and employee relations. So three of you, thank you so much for being here. There's always so many places we can start a conversation like this, but I would just like to start with a little bit of a general question, and then we'll start to really dig down on everything. But let me start, Fanai, I'm going to start with you. Could you give us an idea about you think that initially the goals should be, if I'm putting together for my company, whether it's a single store or multiple stores, what the goal should be for a skill building process? What is it I really want to make sure that I'm going to attain when I put a skill building process together?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I think about when we look at skill based. I think one is making the training itself very interactive. I often tell people a PowerPoint presentation is not a training. You will lose people along the way. So do you have something that's interactive, where you're asking questions and people are responding so you can gauge for understanding? And it also keeps people engaged. It helps them retain the information. So that is one piece. And two is really having a good understanding of the individuals that you're trying to train. So what is the knowledge base that they're coming to you with? Because if they are experts or expertise in their domain, you'll want some more sophisticated training. Or if it's somebody very new within the industry, are you making sure you're covering sort of that one-on-one base? So that would be the second base, is really understanding that. And then third would also be individualizing training as needed, in terms of, really thinking about who are the people that you're training. So if these are people that are from potentially different generations, what does that training look like? How are you making sure you're providing them the most training? So somebody with teenagers, I can tell you, unless it's a TikTok or a 2-minute training, my kids are not listening to you. Whereas if somebody that's been in the workforce for a really long time, they're going to want very specific instruction based. So I think those would be the things that I would start off with.
I love it. We'll dig down deep into each of those things, but that's great as you're, setting sort of the expectations for a skill building program to have that. Sarah, what are your thoughts as far as those key goals you should have in mind as you put something like this together?
I mean, definitely when you're building something, or when you're executing it, I should say, one word really does come to mind. I mean, you can have a great plan, and you can plan to execute it well, but you've got to be able to adapt. And so just like Fanai said, I mean, you're going to have to adapt to each individual and their learning style, but also who's training that individual or who's trying to help them build the skill. And what part of the day are you doing it in? I mean, in a retail environment, I'm sure a lot of people can attest that if you're not back into a training room and you're trying to train them on and execute what you're wanting to teach them and train them on, if you're not 100% focused at that time, you can get pulled away so easily in our environment. So whether that's individual learning or video learning, you know, you've got to really just look ahead and plan ahead with your team and adapt with anything that comes your way during that. So
Love it.
as you know, also looking at just all the key components of a position. I mean, you've got to have it well built out of from the behaviors that you want them to exude and to, you know, all the processes and procedures that you're going to need to train them on from day 1 to day 180. I mean, we've got a 6-month plan already set out for our sales
There you go.
professionals that we've each week by week, we've got a whole list of everything and what their job, you know, expectations and job responsibility checklists that we use. And so it could be overwhelming for someone to look at, but you've just got to break it down into those pieces and check off once you've got it completed.
I love it. And Simon, I think that already you and everybody listening are getting an idea of why I started here is because you have to have this planned out. This is not just something that you just sort of decide tomorrow you're going to start doing some skill building. So before we get a deeper dive here, what would you think are also those key things to make sure that you have in place, you know, goals, if you will, for whatever skill building program you have?
Well, obviously it's everything that's already been said. But I think that there's kind of two things we also need to keep in mind, because we tend to talk about training and skill building as, you know, a thing, you know, but the question is it ongoing skills maintenance, you know, something that we always need to be doing? And then there's also those kind of more tactical in response to, or a new product line. So I think you need to be able to split those out. But my start point is typically, what are we trying to achieve? Because once you define what you've got now, what the gaps are, that then drives so much of what you're going to be doing. So kind of start at the beginning, which is, so what's the issue, and then how are we going to measure success? So whatever the training is that you're doing needs to have all that built in, and you need to be able to measure whether or not this worked. And some of those are numbers, and some of those are behaviors, etc.
You know, I think it's interesting that in the questions that were placed in prior to the webinar today, it was interesting that there's a strong theme throughout this. There were these concerns about keeping employees engaged, about communication, improving morale, decreasing turnover and retention. And so it seems to me that everything that you guys just talked about really do address each of those things, but just like in different ways. So let's kind of peel this onion one layer at a time. Fanai, I want to start back with you, because you talked about, and the word that I wrote down was personalization, not a one size fits all skill build. So can you talk a little bit about aligning skill building to what's needed, you know, what you're trying to accomplish?
Can you help me? So I want to make sure I'm answering the question appropriately. So what are we, what's the question again?
Well, you said the keys were understanding the individual, and you also talked about really kind of individualizing the training. So really I call it really kind of personalizing it to that individual person. Even Sarah talked a little bit about how it's like, you know, you're thinking about that individual. So what's the best way to ensure that you are, or how do you best individualize it so that it's not just, okay, we're pulling out this, you know, this particular piece, and this is training skills for X, when you might have 3 different people who learn differently?
Yeah. So I'm going to play devil's advocate with myself for a moment. So there's some training you can't necessarily personalize, right? If we're talking about compliance, or you need somebody to learn how to sell a certain product, maybe those pieces don't change. So when I think about individualizing, it's really thinking about the individual, maybe departments or organizations. I think it starts out with goal setting with your employees. So let's say you are a small organization and you have 10 employees. It's really understanding what I'll say back in my Kirkland's days or Target days, we used to call it the WIFM, which is what's in it for me. So really understanding what drives your employees, what are they, what really helps motivate them, and how do I create the training around that? So if they want to become maybe the best salesperson or the best customer engagement person, how do I really make sure that they understand this training will help them get there? And also from their career goals, how does this training help them develop to the next level? So I think there's some of that career development along the way that helps them achieve these goals. So did you have a question?
Well, I mean, no, it's interesting that you say that because I think you've taken us in a good way back a step, because it sounds as if here's what I'm hearing. If I have to understand what drives this employee, what motivates them, then, and I'm going to dovetail, let Sarah pick up on this, then I got to be, first of all, before I really focus on skill building, I got to know my team. And I mean, so can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think what Fanai really led us into here is this cannot be and should not be a one size fits all for anybody.
I definitely think it starts when you're getting to know before they are even starting with the company, what their learning style is, or what their skill sets are, and what you're going to need to be focusing on more when they're coming in. If you bring somebody in the company that doesn't necessarily have a high level of technology skills, you're probably going to be spending more time on that versus maybe they had 10 years of sales. So you're going to have a balance and kind of craft a plan potentially where you're going to need to spend more time. But also, even whether it's a new person joining the organization or somebody that's been with us for 5 to 6, 10 years, you're going to still need to know that individual from a standpoint of how they learn best. And maybe it's not reading a book versus watching a video, or actually, having a mentor and having them shadow, or, you've got to find out what gives them energy to be able to learn that new position or new skill set.
Simon,
so having an honest conversation with
100%. Simon, here I thought we were going to make it easy on people. We're going to give them the just add water. Here's the skill build and move on. And now Fanai and Sarah have basically said that this engagement piece, this retention piece starts with the hiring process. So would you please talk a little bit about that? Because I think that we need to remind people that this is not just something that you can just decide to start tomorrow from square one, that there's pre-work that's got to be done to get us where you need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we very much encourage the clients that we're helping to do is to build that into the recruitment process. And even in larger companies, often it isn't the case. Companies do a really good job at doing the stuff you expect at the interview process. But there's a bit of a kind of a drop ball between the point where during the process you identify what the person needs, and then the support they're given to bring them up to speed. And particularly in sales, and particularly we found this when I was with 3-Day Blinds, is the better you are at identifying that gap, the quicker they're going to be up to speed. And in those positions, they're commission only, so their ability to get off the draw, their ability to start selling efficiently, is very dependent on your ability to move them from, okay, we've got you on board, we've got a good idea of what you need. And back to comments made a minute ago, is that process then becomes an ongoing dialogue, and you can call it performance management. I'd rather use the term, let's talk constantly about how, what's working, rather than once a year. In my opinion, it's not effective.
Well, and Simon, you said something when you gave your first answer, and you used a really great term called skill maintenance. And so that also says to me that you've got to understand what that skill base is. So Sarah, how do you determine that? So since we've now backtracked to the hiring process for a moment, how do you ensure that you're ascertaining what someone's skills are, they're what they're good and they're not so great are, how do you assess that so that you can really start to put them at the beginning of this plan? What do you do?
I mean, of course, it's questions in the interview, and determining what kind of learner they would be, but also asking questions about how they've adapted to a lot of things at one time. So give them an example prior to making an offer to them. So we kind of know how they've adapted to a lot of change and learning new things and different things like that. And of course, that helps make a hiring decision. Once they're in the company, though, I mean, it's just those honest conversations and follow-ups throughout their, if we're talking about onboarding, I guess, and developing and training them in their first 90 to 180 days. I mean, it's got to be a lot of touch bases and how are you feeling in this position and what are your current opportunities or where do you feel like you're struggling? So then that way, if they're feeling overwhelmed with the technology, they're feeling overwhelmed with taking a customer and not knowing what to say, then we know where to steer the training or the support for them.
Fanai, what have you seen as having been some of the most successful ways that you and your teams have ascertained these skills up front and really getting those hints early as to how somebody may be motivated and by what kind of training?
Yeah, I think all of the things that Sarah said, the interview process, as well as within the training, assessing how people are progressing. One of the things that I also, remind our leaders as they onboard new people is learning, along with the fact that people have different learning styles, there's sometimes some accommodations that we need to think through. So if you are hiring somebody that might have a hearing difficulty or vision impaired or those type of things, you may need to tailor some of that type of training. So if you're doing something over the computer, we've had situations where we've actually had to change our computer setting because somebody might not be able to visually see what's being presented. Or if they're hearing impaired, maybe they need to have the caption, the closed caption. So really understanding that piece, because sometimes there's a difference between the ability, somebody being able to learn the information in the way it's presented, and there might be other accommodations we might need to make so somebody can also learn and adapt from that perspective. So I think those are some of the things, like really asking people and talking through them. I think Sarah mentioned as you're talking to someone and maybe it's in a training class, you're walking through them and you seem they're having some challenges, go through the technology, is having that conversation and saying, hey, I noticed this is happening. What can we do to help you, in order to achieve, complete the training, and we really helping working with them. So it is a little bit more work, but I think you'll also have, when you find that somebody absorbs the information the way you need, those employees tend to also be the most successful because they know that you're vested in them long term.
And can you just ask directly? I mean, can you just ask somebody, how do you prefer to learn? I mean, is it just that simple as well? I mean, or do you think people are not that forthcoming with? Sarah, what do you
do both, right? I mean, I was going to say, I think you can do. I think you can do that. One, sometimes people don't know how they learn best either. I think you have to also provide them a couple of different options. Sure. And I think when you do ask that, you also have to be ready for the answer. And you have to be ready to be able to accommodate that.
And by the way, I will tell you this, just from a personal standpoint, that I'm partially colorblind. And so if I'm given materials that have a red background with dark print, I can't read anything on it. I know that's, and most people are like, really? And I'm like, and I don't think I'm alone in that. So even that can be a stumbling block to training. So you guys are just, really peeling this back beautifully here. And there's so many things that I want to make sure we don't run past here. Simon, one of the things that Fanai brought up and Sarah also led us a little bit into here is that part of this is also understanding, maybe I call it a career path, but understanding what somebody's goal is, right? Because if you know that and what they want to achieve, then you can sort of blend the skill build so that it's not just helping your company out, but you're also giving them something that's going to motivate them. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is it important to make sure that you have these communications with the team to understand what their designs on their career is?
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask about that within the hiring process. And I think it does start there. One of the things you want to say is, question, where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? And it's become rather a joked about phrase, but it's actually a pretty good question. But in terms of the team, you do need, if you look at the way that people most typically describe a good leader is that they actually listen to me, they actually care about me. And that doesn't mean you go up and give them a hug every 10 minutes. It means you just sit and you do that. You listen to them. You ask, you find out about what they're interested in. And that's not just on the job, that's off the job, because you'll learn a lot about someone and about their motivations, and probably more by finding out and talking about things they do when they're not at the job as much as where they are. So I certainly think that, you know, a good leader is going to be able to individually work out and work with an individual to see, you know, what are your goals and, you know, what's realistic and what isn't. And there's no point in making promises you can't keep.
And Sarah, before I get off of that, is that something that you do utilize? I mean, do you want to kind of get an idea what their design is or what their thought is for the future at your company?
Absolutely. Whether that's in the, like Simon said, in the hiring process, but also throughout the employee's career at the company. You want to be checked in and having those conversations often. With our leadership, we try to connect every couple of weeks and really just, you know, check in with projects or things that are on our mind. We actually have an exercise we do in a lot of our leadership one-on-ones where we go through our professional highs and professional lows, or personal highs and personal lows. And that sometimes can just pull out, you know, what are you struggling with, or, you know, whatever you most are proud of that you've been achieving in your career and outside of your career. So yeah, definitely important. Also, of course, in the performance review or in, you know, different conversations that you're having, we've this year decided to take on the employee doing a self-assessment and letting us know, like, where do they see themselves in the company as we're growing, and you know, continuing to, you know, have our 1 and 3 year plan out in front of everybody to see. They know that there's potential for that growth, and where could they see themselves in the organization, whether they're in sales now and see themselves in management or merchandising or even distribution.
I love the fact, by the way, in case anybody hasn't noticed, that's what's on the wall behind you, is we're a coaching company. We coach and are coachable to develop and get the best of each
our
other.
core values. Yeah, we have those throughout our company everywhere. So
yeah, I mean, so it's not a prop. It's there full time. So this wasn't just put up for today. No, this is I think this has been a really great start to this, because it's just so clear that there's such a purposefulness to this, and this is not just about going out and buying a skill building program and thinking that's going to change things in your, you know, particularly in your company. And so I think this has been a really important first stop for our conversation. Now, a lot of people ask, and if this is unanswerable, that's okay. And I'm going to throw this out as a toss up for anybody to jump in, but there's a lot of questions about, so what type of skills should we include in this skill building? And on the one hand, that may sound really rudimentary. Oh yeah, well, sales skills or whatever. But I think we're talking about skills that go way beyond just that. So who wants to jump in first as far as what you think are the important skills that need to be part of any skill building program?
I mean, I can jump in because I'm pretty proud to say that our company is pretty amazing when it comes to giving our employees the opportunity to learn skills that you wouldn't think you'd learn at work. I mean, we've had in the past, as far as like groups that we've brought together called our Leadership Academy, we've done different skill building areas like budgeting and financing. And of course, we talk about that from a personal standpoint, but then, you know, the company standpoint of financials. And so teaching employees about that. We've used the Gallup strengths assessments. Those are been very important. We've done colors tests and different things like that with our entire company, to where it just helps them understand, you know, you should know what kind of a person you are, but it just helps you understand how you work with others. And, you know, I may be a very outgoing, outspoken person, but somebody that I work with closely every single day, you know, is more of a, you know, administrative, not as outgoing. So how can I work with them more effectively in our roles? So we actually also bring in a consultant every quarter in all of our locations that helps us train on professional and personal topics like personal accountability. And we've done like adapting to change and how to be resilient, and of course customer service topics, and just different things like that get our employees thinking outside of their normal day to day and how it can relate in the workplace and outside of the workplace. So just amazing topics like that that you can use not only in the workplace, but at home with your families and in your personal life.
Yeah, and you've used the word 3 times, and it's clear it's important to y'all, is that adaptability piece, which is interesting. Fanai, I saw you nodding a lot there. Can you want to add in a little bit more?
Yeah, I think, one of the ones that struck me that Sarah talked about was that the change management and the adaptability. I think skills, we're in a changing environment all the time. I think how you do business today is not how you did business 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. And I would predict that will continue to change. So I think, when you think about skills, you have to think about how do we continue to stay in pace with the external environment with business, but also competitive within. So that could change. I think what you have to teach people is how to be adaptable, how to be open to change. Along with that, a lot of interpersonal skills around communication. We also have skills where we talk about unconscious bias, so helping people recognize their own biases when they interact with others, so especially if they're customer facing or one another. So I think that adaptability piece is huge in making people sure that people are always thinking about that. And we always talk about the only thing constant is change. And once people realize that, they continue knowing that they have to adapt new skills moving forward.
Simon, what I'm hearing, and I wrote this down, is most of this sounds like, and I'm referring to it as E to E, employee to employee, rather than most of it being E to C, employee to customer. Is that, am I reading that right? And is it a basis for skill building that the internal will absolutely drive the external? Or is it, tell me how that balances out, because I just find it interesting that so much of this seems to be E to E to me.
Yeah, and my answer is I think that they go together, but they're really quite different. Because I would say is we need to have, training can make an effective organization, right? But I can have an effective organization, but it doesn't sell anything because it doesn't really understand what the customer wants, and to the point of change, what they want today, because it might not be what it was last month, let alone last year. So one of the things when it comes to, so what should we be doing is finding out. So the first, there's 2 parts. One is, what are we trying to do? What's the symptoms? What are we trying to address? It doesn't have to be a problem. It can be a goal. But secondly, just as importantly, we ask employees, what are your goals and what do you want to do? How do you want to be treated? We should ask the customers the same thing. And once we know that, then we can say, okay, now when we're coming to train team and collaboration and self-awareness, that's great. But also we're going to teach you about what's happening in the market, what we're finding when customers come in to the store. And we'll train you in what we're learning about that. Because unfortunately, if the employee learns themselves, that's a missed sale, right? So if we can get ahead of the game and say, this is what we're seeing, let's do this, and teach them, what it is that we've learned from the customers, whether that's in, buying furnishing or anything else.
So, and Fanai, I'll go to you. So what's the balance then between those 2 areas of skill build, and the emphasis on that? The employee, the internal, and then the external.
I think it's very yin and yang, right? I think you have to have both. I think overall, I'll tell you from an HR perspective, as a leader perspective, when I sit down with Curtis, we always talk about what are your business goals? What do you want to achieve in 2024? And it could be drive X sales, do all this. So those are the business objectives. Then we go, okay, who are the people that need to achieve that goal, and how are we going to help them achieve that? So, and then when you drill down further and we said, like, okay, here are the things they need. I'll give you a very quick example. One of the things we had last year was a training around being innovative, how to sell differently, how to think differently, how to, if your client says that they're looking for this, how do you think outside the box versus offering them our routine? So that's very outside based, but we also had to work with the individuals to help them develop the skills to feel comfortable asking these type of questions. So I think it's a really good balance in between. If it has to be that employee base within, helping them understand that piece, and then also what do we need to achieve from a business perspective and the client. So I think they're very different, like Simon said, but they go hand in hand as well. And I don't think you can have one without the other.
I love having Simon on the show because 3 times we've said Simon says, and I revert back to my childhood. Um, Sarah, how do you all, because clearly this type of training and coachability is, part of your values, et cetera. So how do you balance this? Because it really is two separate things that, as Fanai says, they do sort of blend together. But I think it's gonna be helpful for folks out there to understand, how these things be put together and what emphasis to put on both.
I mean, I'm just going to revert back to what's one of the most important things in our organization, and our vision is to have an exceptional impact on people. And so that really encompasses our customers, of course, and our employees, and then our community. And it also ties into what we do from what our mission is in our organization, and that's to impact 500,000 families by January 1st of 2030. And so we're really pushing this with our employees over these last several years, and we keep track of how many families we're impacting. And of course, one of the biggest parts of this all is our customer interactions, our customer sales, of course, what our customers are saying about us, of course, like on Google reviews and different things. So how can we understand that what we're training our people on is working? So that's a big piece of that. And then of course, our employee experience, our employee benefits. Of course, if we take care of our employees, they're going to take care of our customers, right? And then giving back to the community. So our volunteering, our donations of goods and services, and everything goes into the whole piece of impacting our families.
Wow. So you really do take the culture piece, because when you said impact on people, so all of these skill builds are for this bigger picture as far as you all are concerned, part of that culture, which is interesting, takeaway for some of the folks watching that might, want to aspire to do something like that. But that's an all-in kind of a situation. I mean, clearly you guys have embraced that from the top down. Wow.
Another thing, Mark, that I want to share that our leadership team talks about quite often is in the skill building, in the training, especially from the process standpoint, you can train and teach and, you can check that off and say you did it, but a couple of weeks later or a week later, we should be following up with that person and having them show us how to do it, or maybe physically monitoring that they understood what was trained or understood the process that we coach them on. So I don't know if that goes along with what we were talking about, but
no, it's not, you're saying it's not just to set it and forget it. It's a process, and it's just part way of, a way of getting you there. No, I think it's hugely helpful. And because again, so many of the questions that people had in advance were struggling with it, with a lot of this. Before we go to kind of the next little section I want to talk about, Simon, I wanted to ask you, you talked about the difference, there is definitely a difference between that employee to the team member to the customer communication versus the internal. So tell me what, from your seat, what are those key skills that you feel that those sales representatives, those RSAs need to have specifically, or what are the areas that you as an employer need to be looking at to make sure that they're highly skilled in certain areas? What do you put as those priorities?
Oh, well, that's a tough one.
So that's what I'm here for.
I think it's, as we were just saying, there's those two areas. So I'm a big believer in that an organization, and it's our employees, we're 80 to 90% there, right? But it's so what's the 10 to 15% which will make us an enormously successful company? So again, I'll bang on the same drum, and that is, what is it that we're trying to do? Where do we see there are gaps between the way we're behaving internally and the results we're getting on the floor with customers?
Okay, fair. Okay.
So focus on those. And so first of all, identify what those are, then find the best ways to do that. And the skills will depend on the place, the type of customer, the type of product, the product mix, all those things. So once you've identified those things, and then you've got, why you're doing it, you put the measures in place some of those measures are internal, like did you learn it as an employee? And secondly, did I see you treating a customer differently last week as a result? So
Love it. Yeah. Okay.
And then putting in what you identify, and that's going to vary, right? And then secondly, making sure you're able to measure the impact and success.
So your great takeaway for anybody listening is what I'm hearing you say is that if there's a disconnect, essentially, you're calling it a gap. I'm calling it the disconnect from Mal. We've given all these skills. Why is this not showing itself in our results here in the revenue coming in the door, and then trying to figure out how to bridge that gap? And I think that's a great point. You know, there's a question. I'm going to go to some of the questions here because I think some of these are really good, and I'd love for us to kind of tick these off here. I'll throw this out to everybody. Are there specific skill building tools that are out there that people can use? I mean, there are those that want some help here, and so that's a question. Are there skill building tools out there?
I mean, we don't have any that I can think of. Well, we use Friedman is our sales process that we use, and Ashley.
Okay.
And I mean, there's a lot of specific tools throughout that program that we use where we have weekly one-on-ones. We have morning huddles where we go over, you know, specific things. Now, if it's software that you're talking about, I mean, there's certain things within that, but so weekly one-on-ones, morning communication, monthly goals. So you're making sure that you're monitoring,
Okay.
you know, what you're teaching and training. But I don't know if that answered your question, but LinkedIn has a lot of good resources out there if you just want to, or YouTube. I mean, you can go out and find a training on anything and that you want to build your skills on, I think.
Or maybe the answer is no also. I mean, maybe there's not, that it's got to be so personalized. Fanai, what do you think?
Well, it's, you know, I actually met with our learning and development team because necessarily, you know, anything from a systems perspective is not within my brand of expertise. So I met with them just to ask them and say, hey, what are some tools that we use? And, you know, even with an organization our size, they said, you know what, we use LinkedIn. We use YouTube. The other one, they said there are some products out there. One's called Captivate and one's called Storyboard that you can use. And really where our learning and development trainer told me, she's like, listen, the most important part is not the type of product you use, it's what goes into the product. So we talked about it earlier. Is your training interactive? Does it ask a question? Does it check for understanding? And they said it's really important to try to make your training under 30 minutes because people's attention span, it doesn't hold for that long. The other thing that they gave was a very cost-effective method that we've been trying is almost like a podcast. So what we've recently done is where it could be you and I, Mark, we talk about a topic and we ask questions back and forth, and then afterwards follow up with a training that checks for understanding and has some additional information. The biggest encouragement I got was there's so many free tools out there that you can utilize and you can learn, and people have already utilized some of that. And then how do you incorporate some of that existing skill-based training into what you're doing every day as well?
Gotcha. You use it, and I think the word tool is key here, right? It's not a, as we said, it's not a one size fits all kind of situation. Simon, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I would add is that, I mean, there are tools, and it doesn't need to be rocket science. You know, I've used a basic kind of a template for years with various companies. Is doing an evaluation of, so what skills do we need and how we're doing against that, each individual. And building what I call a skills matrix, so that you can then say, now we know what we need, we know where all the team is, and we're going to focus in. So Simon's good at this, but knows he's weak on that. So real simple processes to make that a constructive and equitable process. Another thing is making it okay that there's a time and a place to get training, right? Some organizations, and what are you doing when I'm watching a YouTube about training? Well, that's not work. Well, you know. And sometimes that's okay, sometimes it isn't. So it's defining that there is a valuable time, it's value to be spending the time and taking the space to be trained and get trained. And also to make sure that folks have got access, so we talked several times about learning styles, is to make sure that everybody's learning style, somehow there's a way for them to get that training. Because as we've said many times already, one size doesn't fit all. So flexibility, give people places to go and have a look and give them the access, pay for it if needed, but make it available for them to get there in their own time.
And I'd be remiss not to mention to anybody that will listen, we have a fabulous HFA Sales Academy. That's also a great place to go for resources. And we've just been hearing from so many retailers about how it's really been a game changer. So that's something I just want to throw in there as well. Let me
One of
ask you
the
this.
things we
Yeah,
do,
I'm
Mark,
sorry.
I just wanted to throw this in there, is we
Do it.
actually do have our people do product demos every as a part of our morning training. And so they have to go out and do the research and prepare to do a demo in front of their peers for 10 minutes. You know, whether it's a new, you know, product that we brought in on the floor, they're going out and researching what it is and giving us the
Interesting.
demo on it.
So by having them research it, then you're really having them put their own little personalization on it without it being something that's just sort of spoon fed. That's interesting. Okay. That's a
Yeah,
cool
I was going to ask
concept.
definitely role playing is another big one too that we try to do in the, you know, if we have a different sale that we're rolling out or a new ad or whatever that are going to bring customers in that we've got to shift gears on promoting, you know, we'll use our training time in the morning to do role playing and different things between our employees.
Yeah, I was going to add really quick to that. One of the things that I saw really being utilized, especially when out at my time at Kirkland's, with the role playing is let's say there's a store somewhere that's selling the product really well, is having them demonstrate what are some of the things that they've done to help you know, increase the sales or increase, you know, knowledge about a product. And one, it also serves as recognition for that employee that's doing that because it recognizes what a great job they're doing. But it also gives tips and tricks for other people in ways that they can, you know, that they can go then and implement it versus somebody sitting behind a desk who's trying to think up of training. These are people and experts within the field that are able to demonstrate things that have worked for them that could work for others as well too.
Well, and you know, for you know, Sarah's company has multiple stores, and it could be a store-to-store thing, or it could just be within your own staff in a single store. I mean, I think that's a really great point. You know, what is working well. You know, there's a couple of things that I also want to get to based on the questions we got in. Do you feel like this skill building does it? Because one of the goals that some of our concerns, I should say, that some of our the folks attending had was about improving morale. You know, this has been so up and down. It's been so hard to get a good, you know, sort of a baseline going in any company because of just all of these challenges that just, you know, just kick everybody up and down all over the place. Can it do that, Sarah? Have you seen that be a, you know, a real morale changer and really helping the team feel better? It's one thing to be skilled, it's another thing to feel good about it.
Definitely, I think with some help to understand, like, you know, how much the company is attributing to their development. I mean, some people may have the blinders on and not be able to appreciate it, but we as leaders have to make sure that we showcase that, hey, this is a benefit to you, especially when we do the extra things like bring in a speaker and we have a group session on personal accountability or, you know, your personal finances or different topics like that. I mean, sometimes people can unfortunately take that for granted, but I think it's you as a leader that has to make sure that they understand that this training that we provide you an hour before the store opens every day. I mean, we don't have to bring our salespeople in an hour before, but we do to give them that time to train and learn new products. And you know, we do some brain food too, which is usually like a podcast or something like that. So just being able to showcase that as a part of the benefit package, really.
I just want to be part of something where if I'm considered brain food, that would be such a compliment. I don't know if that's the case, but I'm just going to throw that one out there. But Simon, I saw you kind of nodding there too, as far as that piece goes. Because I don't think we can undersell the importance of building that team morale in difficult times, and it seems like these things go hand in hand with the skill building, that you can really have that be a goal as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and to the points that have been made there is you know, it's what I call a catalytic process. So if you start if people are constantly seeing and involved in a process day after day after day, that becomes the culture, right? So the environment I've just described is, this is an expectation, right? Right before we hire you, this is what we do. When you, every day you're going to come in, this is what we believe. Learning and sharing information is part of who we are, right? So that in itself creates a desire. And some people won't like it and they'll leave, and that's okay, right? Other people say, this is what I want. This is great. So use those constant reminders. And in terms of kind of keeping people engaged, I mean, there's three things ways I look at it is, make sure people feel that they can speak up and contribute without being warned or worried about being embarrassed. Realize that someone in the room there's got a different idea about something, they've seen it differently. You know, say, has anybody got a completely different view on this? And then just make sure that people are comfortable, and there's as I say, an expectation that this is a place where we share information. If you've just found a way to sell that, it worked 3 times, do.
Yeah.
So those are 3 ways that I think, you know, if you follow those, you will maximize your chances of keeping people, you know, that word engaged.
Well, and you know, if you're sitting there getting people comfortable with talking and interacting like that, that's what customer relations and the customer experience is all about. So, I mean, those are skills that are gonna definitely translate. So I appreciate that. This question kind of struck close to home, and it gets back to something that was said at the very beginning that Fanai, you mentioned about different, I think you said different generations, perhaps. There was a question that said, how do you keep older employees engaged, those that have been around, either been around for a while or just a little bit gray like I am? So the question is how does that play in, or is it not something that you should really focus and worry on and just be more focused on the individual skill wise and not where they are generationally?
I think it's very important, of course, to think about the individual. I am part of the Gen X generation, but because I have teenagers at home, I probably identify with Gen Z a lot more because that's the language I hear all the day. However, I might have different expectations myself from where I am in a career perspective than I did 20 years ago. And I'd want my manager or somebody that's working with me to understand that. So I think that applies to within the workforce in general as well, is really understanding it's not necessarily generations, it might be where people are within their career. So somebody who's just starting out within their career might be in a very different place than somebody who's 20 years in, 30 years in, or maybe looking at retirement 10 years from now. What is their motivator? So their motivator could be, hey, I want to make sure that I've really planned for the future financially, or is it my time off? I want to make sure that's really protected, that I have those, or is it their benefits because they have dependents that are depending on them? So you really have to, or is it, you have to, so those are the things I think you have to keep in mind. So it's not necessarily generations, it might be where people are within their career and what they're hoping to get. And I think both Sarah and Simon alluded to this earlier, is really understanding what people's goals are and then helping them achieve that. I think that's really important. And the other piece is, if you have a tenured employee that's doing really phenomenal, how are you utilizing that person from a skill set perspective? How are they passing on the knowledge that they have? And when they're suggesting new ideas or new ways because they know their clients so well, are we really listening to that? A lot of times we hear people leave organizations, not because of the organization, but because of their manager. And why is that? Maybe their manager didn't listen. The manager didn't take time to provide training. So that's one piece. And the other is because their ideas weren't listened to. I think if you find a curious employee, regardless of the generation, it's super important to hear those ideas, because those ideas can translate into dollars for an organization. And that goes back to really listening to what somebody might say from the different generations. You're going to have people that are super tenured, that are going to have some really great information and training tips. Then you have somebody coming new into an organization that's going to say, well, why don't we do this? Or why do we do this? Or how can we keep doing it this way? So how are you listening to all of those different pieces and making sure everyone's voice is heard?
Okay. And before I move on, anybody else have any thought process to that generational piece, or did Fanai did a nice job of covering that?
Good, awesome.
Okay, the thumbs up. We give her a thumbs up on it. Also as I'm looking at some of these questions, the word reward came up. So is that something that needs to be connected at all with a lot of the skill building? Is there a carrot to be dangled out there as well? Does it have to be out there as well? Because there's people that are asking, are there unique ways within the skill building to reward. Who wants to take that one? Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, I think there's two things, and we've talked about it in other ways. There's the turning up to the training, and then there's applying it, right? So I think while I think it's a good idea to or an idea to reward people for actually making the effort, spending time to get the training, my preference is always to reward folks who are demonstrating that they've learned from it and improved from it. And even one step back from that to say, look, the reward comes when you apply this. You'll see that you sold 3 more items today. But being creative, particularly if you've got something where, for whatever reason, an employee or a group of employees are going to be reluctant, finding ways to incent them, and there's sticks and carrots, right? I'm not saying you always have to do something, but I think it's always a sensible thing to say, look, the question is, how do we get people to participate, and how do we get people to apply it? And if there are creative ways and ways you can incentivize to do that, with all the different options available for that, of course, I think that's a good thing, and it should be part of the plan when you're actually developing the training.
Sarah?
Yes and no, in my opinion on that.
Okay.
I mean, no, from a standpoint of, I feel like your growth and your commitment to building your skills has to be, the commitment has to come from you. No one can make you do it. You've got to have the consistency and the drive and the want, and you need to have a personal goal of what do you want this to do for you, depending on what kind of, if it's to learn the job, that's a different kind of a thing, but maybe it's to get that promotion or go to the next level in the company. Eventually, like Simon said, it's going to be noticed. And if you've worked hard and done the work and showed that the training and the processes that you've learned, or the skills that you've learned have been successful, then you should be rewarded in itself. It should come. So I don't know if that answers your question at all.
No, absolutely. Fair enough. Let me ask this too, just as we're kind of getting into the last few minutes here. I think Simon was the first one that mentioned this too, but you don't always want to talk about this standpoint, but all this attention to skills, etc., is also going to lead people to the door. So can you talk a little bit about how this has helped and can help to somehow, we don't like always talk about it, but to weed out the people that maybe it's not a good fit. Can you talk a little bit about, and Fanai, I'll start with you, about how this process can also be a great way to really continually assess your team as well?
Yeah, I think, if you are having those consistent discussions around your goals and performances, along with that is a consistent discussion of how you're meeting the objectives that have been established for you. I think the manager of an individual owns that with their employees. So if they're taking either skills-based training or meeting the expectations of their role, so those skill trainings should help somebody achieve the goals and objectives of the business. If they're not, I think you have to have very transparent conversations with that employee and say, at this point, you're currently not meeting the job objectives that we have established for you. Let's talk about a path to help you achieve that, or maybe a path for you to consider this might not be the right organization or role for you. I think it's really important to have those transparent conversations with an employee. I think you do a disservice to an employee if they're not meeting the expectations that have been established for them, either through the training or through the business, if you just let it slide, right? And I think that's why it's important to have those consistent connections to help establish that piece. And if it gets to the point where they're not meeting that, you have to move on to the next step.
Right, because you're going to continue just to spend the time and money on the training, and it's not going to lead you to where you need to go. To your point, Simon, you're not going to bridge that gap. You want to just talk briefly about that as well?
Yeah, I think all those points were great. The only thing I would add is that with an HR hat on, one of the important things is sometimes people go willingly and sometimes people go less willingly. It's one of the reasons that having good logic reasoning for why people need certain skills and training, and a record of the opportunities that they've had to do that, is sound business advice, regardless of the other things we've talked about.
Sarah, have you seen that as well, as far as in helping you make some difficult decisions as well?
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, we call it crucial conversations. I'm sure you guys have heard of it, but when you see it, you need to say it. So if you see somebody that's not meeting the requirements, or their skills really just aren't there for the position, you do need to come up with a plan, like Fanae said, and the number one thing that you have to make sure that you do is you have to have timely follow-up and timely communication and accountability with it. And ultimately, in my opinion, it needs to fall in the hands of the person that is not meeting the expectations. How seriously are they taking this? Like, they could lose their job if they don't try to improve their performance. But then it also comes back to the manager and making sure that they're consistently following up and making that tough decision if it's just not going to work out anymore.
So
And I've seen it
tons,
work out
yes.
before too. So I mean, there's
Okay.
been some success stories as well.
Good.
But
We needed that little silver lining. I appreciate that. I wasn't trying to bring us down, but no, listen, it's I mean, let's get real. We've all been in situations where we've had team members that have just not been a fit. And I think it was Fanai that said it. It's not respectful to them also. It's not just you, but it's not respectful to them to try to fit the round peg into the square hole. It's not respectful to the whole team to say, that we have lesser expectations, or we're just going to allow, less than, a certain benchmark of performance. So no, I think it's all critically important and part of the culture and part of the ability to really, show the team that you're serious and you back what you're doing. So we've had great takeaways here. From the very beginning, we talked about interactive training, understanding the individual, and really getting that whole part together from the point of hiring, from the very, very beginning. Adaptability, critically important. And also I love the fact that really kind of hammering home the whole issue of starting at the hiring process was Simon saying that skill maintenance. I think that's a wonderful way of looking at it, that you're carrying it all the way through. So in our last couple of minutes here, we have just a couple of minutes. I just want to get a couple of quick answers here. So if I'm listening to this and I really don't have a real program like this in place, briefly, what are the first things I need to start with? And I have a feeling we're going to talk a lot about the hiring process, but Fanai, what is it, anybody listening to this need to do right now to really start to build a solid skill building program?
We already spoke about the hiring process, but I think I want to go back to, you need to know what you want to accomplish. What is the goal that you have? What are the gaps that might be missing? And what are the steps? And then how will you also measure success? So I think those three things are super important as you're building out a training program.
Okay, Sarah?
I would echo that. I mean, you have to know what you're lacking in, and what your goal is to improve or accomplish, and then just sprinkle in fun little podcasts or different things on YouTube to increase the awareness. It can be that simple, and it's free too. So
dare I say webinars? I'm
Yeah.
just tossing that. I'm just
or the
tossing that.
HSA webinars hosted by Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Shameless, but I love it. Simon, what would you also say would be the thing for people to kind of right the ship right now?
Well, I think, I mean, you mentioned the maintenance thing a minute ago, and I do think that kind of split is a real one. So the first thing is, if the question is, I need to make sure that I have a plan for maintenance, the first thing is to make that matrix. Identify all the skills and behaviors and traits and all the things that, whichever way you want to describe them, list them out, literally list them out. What are the things my people need to do in each job? And then do an analysis of that, and then focus in on those individuals and give them the help that they need.
And I know what Sarah would add to that is she would also say, then here's your goal, and then backfill from there as far as what that process looks like to get them to that point, right? I mean, fair?
Yes. Yeah. And then the other one is that strategic stuff. It's an either or both. You can say, okay, what do we know is coming down the pike as part of succession planning? It's part of to say, okay, this is what these skills are going to need. Have we got them? Do we need to hire them?
Fabulous. I want to thank our guest today, Sarah Luther from Hometrends. We just appreciate having you always. Great insights and a beautiful culture there at your company. Thank you for sharing that. Simon Watson, owner CEO of Mossword HR Solutions. Simon says, He does. And Panay Taye from Synchrony, the SVP of HR there. Once again, we just thank you guys. You really did what we always want to achieve to do on these webinars, and that is just give a ton of takeaways. And if nothing else, really spark a lot of great conversations and thoughts around our industry with fellow retailers. So on behalf of all of us here at HFA, I'm Mark Schumacher. I want to thank you for joining us. And always, we wish two things: good health and great sales. We will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.